The scent of oil and grease filled the air as Ethan tightened the last bolt on an aging propeller plane. Sweat dripped down his forehead, stinging his eyes, but he didn't stop until the engine roared back to life. It was moments like these that kept him going, the satisfaction of solving problems others deemed impossible. Still, satisfaction didn't pay the bills, and the stack of overdue invoices on his desk reminded him daily how precarious his situation had become. At 29, Ethan Carter had long since given up on grand ambitions. Growing up in a small rural town, he'd learned early on that dreams often came second to survival. His father had been a mechanic too, teaching him everything he knew before passing away when Ethan was just 16. Since then, Ethan had poured every ounce of energy into keeping their family repair shop afloat. But despite his talent for fixing even the most stubborn engines, business had slowed to a trickle over the years. The old airstrip nearby saw fewer flights each month, leaving Ethan scrambling to find work wherever he could. His mornings typically started before sunrise, sipping weak coffee while reviewing repair manuals or tinkering with parts salvaged from junkyards. By midday, he'd be elbow-deep in engine compartments, diagnosing issues for local pilots who couldn't afford fancier services. And by evening, exhausted and covered in grime, he'd collapse onto the couch in the tiny apartment above the shop, staring at the ceiling and wondering if things would ever get better. But Ethan wasn't one to dwell on self-pity for long. He prided himself on being resourceful, determined, and honest, qualities that earned him respect among those who knew him. Even so, there were nights when doubt crept in. What if he never managed to expand the business? What if this was it? A lifetime spent fixing broken machines without building anything meaningful of his own. That thought lingered in his mind as he wiped his hands clean after finishing the propeller plane. Just as he turned to pack up his tools, his phone buzzed insistently on the workbench. Caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. "Hello?" he answered, bracing himself for bad news. "Is this Ethan Carter?" a clipped voice asked. "We need your help urgently. There's a private jet stranded at Hillside Airstrip with engine trouble. Can you handle it?" Ethan hesitated. Private jets weren't exactly his specialty. He mostly dealt with smaller aircraft, but desperate times called for bold moves. Besides, the caller mentioned the job paid well, and money was something Ethan desperately needed right now. "I'll be there within the hour," he replied, grabbing his toolbox. As he drove toward the airstrip, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this job might be different from the rest. Maybe it was the urgency in the caller's tone or the fact that private jets rarely landed near his sleepy little town. Whatever it was, he pushed the thought aside and focused on the task ahead. After all, engines were engines, no matter how fancy the paint job. When he arrived, the sleek silver jet gleamed under the late afternoon sun, looking completely out of place against the backdrop of rusting hangars and cracked tarmac. A uniformed pilot greeted him at the foot of the stairs, explaining the issue in technical jargon that Ethan only half understood. Nodding confidently, he climbed aboard to inspect the engine bay, already formulating a plan. What Ethan didn't notice, at least not immediately, was the young woman sitting quietly near the rear of the cabin. She wore oversized sunglasses and a hoodie pulled low over her face, her posture slouched as though trying to disappear. If he'd glanced her way, he might have noticed the tension in her shoulders or the way she avoided making eye contact with anyone. But Ethan was too focused on the engine to pay attention to passengers. For now, all he cared about was getting the job done. Little did he know, this seemingly ordinary repair call would lead to an extraordinary encounter, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about fate, love, and second chances. Ethan worked methodically, his hands moving with practiced precision as he examined the jet's engine. The problem was more complex than he'd anticipated. A wiring issue compounded by a faulty fuel injector, but it wasn't beyond his skill set. He lost himself in the rhythm of the repair, oblivious to the world outside the cramped engine bay. Tools clinked softly against metal, and the faint hum of activity on the airstrip faded into the background. It wasn't until he heard footsteps approaching that he glanced up. A young woman stood a few feet away, arms crossed and posture relaxed but guarded. She wore oversized sunglasses and a hoodie, her hair tucked neatly beneath the fabric. Despite her casual appearance, there was an air of quiet elegance about her. Something Ethan couldn't quite place but didn't dwell on. "Hey," she said, her voice soft yet steady. "How's it going?" Ethan wiped his hands on a rag before standing. "Making progress," he replied with a small smile. "Shouldn't be too much longer." She nodded, stepping closer. "Mind if I watch? I've always been curious about how these things work." He shrugged, gesturing for her to stay. "Sure, knock yourself out. Just don't touch anything. I wouldn't want you to get grease on those fancy clothes." Her lips curved into a faint smile, though her expression remained unreadable. "Thanks for the warning." As Ethan returned to his task, she leaned against the wall nearby, observing silently. Occasionally, she asked questions, simple ones at first, like what each tool was called or how certain parts functioned. But as the conversation unfolded, her curiosity deepened. "So, do you fix planes like this often?" she asked after a pause. "Not really," Ethan admitted, tightening a bolt with careful precision. "Most of my work is on smaller aircraft. Stuff people can actually afford to fly." She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "And yet you came all the way out here for this job. Why?" He chuckled dryly. "Let's just say I'm not exactly rolling in cash right now. When someone offers good pay for a challenging repair, I don't say no." Her gaze softened, and for a moment, she looked almost wistful. "Must be tough, running your own business." "You could say that," Ethan replied, glancing at her briefly. "But it's rewarding in its own way. Fixing something broken, it gives me a sense of purpose, you know?" She nodded slowly, her fingers absently tracing the edge of her sleeve. "I think I understand. Feeling useful. It's important." Their eyes met for a fleeting second, and Ethan felt a flicker of something unexpected. Curiosity, maybe, or recognition. There was a depth to her words that hinted at experiences far beyond what her youthful appearance suggested. But before he could dwell on it, she shifted the topic. "What made you decide to become a mechanic?" she asked. Ethan hesitated, then shrugged. "My dad taught me everything I know. He ran this little shop back when I was a kid. After he passed, I took over. Guess I never really considered doing anything else." "That's admirable," she said quietly. "Sticking with something because it matters to you. It's not always easy," Ethan admitted, chuckling ruefully. "But hey, life's rarely easy, right?" She smiled faintly, though there was a shadow behind her eyes, a sadness he couldn't quite decipher. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence broken only by the occasional clink of tools or distant murmur of voices from outside. By the time Ethan finished the repairs, twilight had fallen, casting long shadows across the airstrip. As he packed up his tools, the woman approached again, this time removing her sunglasses. Her eyes were striking, a piercing shade of green that seemed to hold decades of untold stories. "You did great work," she said sincerely. "Thank you." "No problem," Ethan replied, slinging his toolbox over his shoulder. "Just doing my job." She hesitated, as though debating whether to say more. Finally, she extended her hand. "I'm Victoria, by the way." "Ethan," he responded, shaking her hand. Her grip was firm but fleeting, leaving him with an odd sense of déjà vu, as if they'd met before, though he knew they hadn't. "Well, Ethan," she said, her tone light but carrying a hint of warmth, "maybe our paths will cross again someday." He grinned, shouldering his toolbox. "Maybe they will." As Ethan walked back to his truck, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Victoria than met the eye. Something about her demeanor, her quiet confidence, her thoughtful questions, stayed with him long after he drove away. But for now, he pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the generous check waiting for him once he submitted his invoice. Little did he know, Victoria wasn't just another passenger, and their meeting was only the beginning of a story neither of them could have predicted. As Ethan drove away from the airstrip, Victoria watched his truck disappear down the narrow road, her thoughts lingering on their brief but meaningful interaction. There was something undeniably compelling about him. His humility, his quiet confidence, and the way he spoke about his work with such passion. In a world where people often wore masks of pretense, Ethan stood out as refreshingly genuine. Victoria sighed, leaning against the sleek exterior of the jet. For years, she'd been surrounded by wealth and privilege, yet loneliness had become her constant companion. Her life was a meticulously curated facade, a string of social events, business meetings, and superficial relationships designed to maintain the sterling family legacy. But beneath the polished surface lay a woman yearning for authenticity, for connection that transcended status and materialism. The recent decision to call off her engagement had only heightened her sense of disillusionment. Charles Whitmore, her fiancé, was everything society expected her to marry: handsome, ambitious, and wealthy beyond measure. Yet, there was no spark, no depth to their relationship. He cared more about her last name than her happiness, and she couldn't bear the thought of spending her life trapped in a loveless marriage. So, she'd walked away, leaving behind not just Charles, but also the relentless scrutiny of the media and high society. Now, sitting here in this remote airstrip, miles away from the glitz and glamour of her usual surroundings, Victoria found herself reflecting on what truly mattered. And strangely enough, it was Ethan who sparked those reflections. His simple, unassuming nature reminded her of qualities missing in her own world, qualities she longed to embrace again. When the pilot approached her to confirm the repairs were complete, Victoria seized the opportunity to act on her gratitude. "How much do we owe him?" she asked, her tone casual but deliberate. The pilot consulted his clipboard. "About $2,500, ma'am. Standard rate for emergency services." Victoria nodded thoughtfully, then instructed, "Pay him double. Make it anonymous. You can attribute it to the company if you need to." The pilot raised an eyebrow but didn't question her generosity. "Of course, Miss Sterling." Satisfied, Victoria settled back into her seat as the jet prepared for takeoff. She didn't expect Ethan to realize the payment came directly from her. Anonymity suited her purpose perfectly. This wasn't about recognition, it was about acknowledging someone who reminded her of the values she'd nearly forgotten. Meanwhile, Ethan returned to his shop, exhausted but relieved to have completed the job successfully. The next morning, he received an email notification confirming the payment. Not just $2,500, but $5,000. Staring at the screen, he blinked in disbelief. "What the?" he muttered aloud, scrolling through the details. Sure enough, the amount was correct, accompanied by a generic note thanking him for his exceptional service. No mention of who authorized the extra funds. Ethan scratched his head, puzzled but grateful. "Guess some rich folks really do tip well," he joked to himself, shaking his head in amazement. While he appreciated the windfall, part of him wondered why someone would go so far out of their way to reward him for a routine repair. It felt personal somehow. Over the following days, Ethan caught himself thinking about Victoria more often than he cared to admit. Her curiosity, her quiet intensity. It all lingered in his mind like fragments of an unfinished puzzle. He replayed their conversation in his head, analyzing every word, every glance. There was something about her that defied easy explanation, as though she carried secrets heavier than the jet she traveled in. For Victoria, the encounter left an equally lasting impression. Back in her penthouse overlooking the city skyline, she found herself sketching ideas for charitable projects inspired by Ethan's dedication to fixing broken things. Perhaps, she mused, there was a way to channel her resources toward helping others rebuild their lives, just as Ethan rebuilt engines. One evening, unable to sleep, Victoria pulled up photos from the airstrip on her phone. The image of Ethan standing beside the jet caught her attention. His face was smudged with grease, his hands calloused from years of hard work. To anyone else, he might have seemed ordinary. But to Victoria, he represented something extraordinary. A reminder that true worth wasn't measured in dollars or titles, but in character and resilience. Her resolve strengthened. If fate had brought them together once, perhaps it would bring them together again. Until then, she vowed to hold on to the lessons Ethan unknowingly taught her. That simplicity could be beautiful, and that kindness, no matter how small, had the power to change lives. Weeks passed, and life returned to its usual rhythm for Ethan. The extra money from the jet repair job allowed him to catch up on overdue bills and even invest in some much-needed upgrades for his shop. Yet, despite the practical relief it brought, the mystery of the anonymous payment lingered in the back of his mind. Who had been so generous? And why? Ethan tried to dismiss it as irrelevant, an anomaly he'd never understand, but Victoria remained a constant presence in his thoughts. Her quiet confidence, her thoughtful questions, and the way she seemed both fascinated and guarded during their brief encounter stayed with him like an unsolved puzzle. He didn't know why, but something about her felt unfinished, as though their story wasn't over yet. Meanwhile, Victoria had thrown herself into work, using her newfound inspiration to launch a series of charitable initiatives aimed at supporting small businesses and rural communities. It was her way of honoring the values Ethan embodied: hard work, resilience, and authenticity. But no matter how busy she kept herself, memories of that day at the airstrip continued to surface, reminding her of the mechanic who unknowingly reignited her faith in humanity. Fate intervened one evening when a mutual acquaintance invited Ethan to a charity gala hosted by none other than Victoria Sterling. At first, Ethan declined. The idea of mingling with wealthy elites held little appeal, but the acquaintance insisted, citing the event's focus on aviation scholarships for underprivileged youth. Reluctantly, Ethan agreed, telling himself it might lead to networking opportunities for his business. The night of the gala arrived, and Ethan found himself standing awkwardly near the entrance of a lavish ballroom, feeling out of place among the sea of tailored suits and designer gowns. He tugged at his borrowed tie, wishing he could disappear into the crowd. That's when he saw her. Victoria stood across the room, radiant in an elegant emerald gown that matched her eyes. She laughed at something a guest said, her poise commanding attention from everyone around her. Cameras flashed as photographers captured her every move, and Ethan realized with a jolt who she really was. Wait, Victoria Sterling? He whispered to himself, stunned. Images flooded his mind. The oversized hoodie, the sunglasses, the quiet curiosity she'd shown while watching him work. Suddenly, everything clicked. The anonymous payment, the sense that she was hiding more than just her appearance. Before he could process further, Victoria turned and spotted him. For a moment, their eyes locked across the crowded room. Recognition flickered in her expression, followed by a mix of guilt and hesitation. Then, excusing herself from the group she was speaking with, she made her way toward him. Ethan, she said softly as she approached, her voice tinged with apology. I wasn't sure you'd remember me. Remember you? Ethan replied, his tone edged with disbelief. How could I forget? You were the passenger on that jet I fixed last month. Victoria nodded, glancing away briefly before meeting his gaze again. Yes, that was me, and I owe you an explanation. She gestured for him to follow her to a quieter corner of the venue, away from prying eyes and cameras. Once they were alone, she took a deep breath and began. I'm sorry I didn't tell you who I was that day, she admitted. I needed a break. From my life, from expectations, and I wanted to experience something real for once. Watching you work, hearing you talk about your passion, it reminded me of things I'd forgotten mattered. So when the repairs were done, I asked the pilot to pay you extra. Not because I wanted to buy your gratitude, but because I wanted to show mine. Ethan listened silently, processing her words. When she finished, he let out a low whistle. That explains the oversized tip. I figured someone must have been feeling generous, but I never imagined it was you. I hope you're not upset, Victoria added quickly. I didn't mean to deceive you. I just needed a moment to breathe without the weight of my name hanging over me. Ethan studied her for a long moment, noting the vulnerability beneath her polished exterior. Despite the wealth and fame surrounding her, she seemed remarkably human. A woman searching for meaning in a world that often valued appearances over substance. I'm not upset, he said finally, offering a small smile. Surprised, yeah, but not upset. If anything, I'm grateful for the payment, sure, but also for reminding me that people are more than what they seem. Victoria smiled faintly, visibly relieved. Thank you for understanding. most people wouldn't be so forgiving. Well, Ethan replied with a shrug. Maybe most people haven't met many billionaires in hoodies. They shared a laugh, the tension between them easing slightly. As the conversation continued, they discovered common ground beyond their initial encounter. Victoria spoke candidly about her struggles with societal pressures and her desire to create change through her philanthropy. Ethan shared stories of his dreams for the future, including plans to expand his repair shop and mentor young mechanics. By the end of the evening, neither of them wanted to part ways. Victoria extended an invitation for coffee the following week, framing it casually but with unmistakable sincerity. Ethan accepted, intrigued by the possibility of getting to know her better. Over the next few weeks, their relationship blossomed into something neither had anticipated. What started as casual meetings evolved into heartfelt conversations about their hopes, fears, and aspirations. Victoria admired Ethan's grounded nature and unwavering integrity, while Ethan appreciated Victoria's vulnerability and commitment to making a difference. Of course, their budding romance wasn't without challenges. Friends and acquaintances on both sides raised eyebrows, questioning whether their connection was rooted in genuine affection or ulterior motives. Critics dismissed Ethan as a gold digger, while others doubted Victoria's ability to adapt to a simpler lifestyle. Both characters faced moments of doubt, wondering if their love could withstand the scrutiny of two vastly different worlds. But through it all, they clung to the authenticity that had drawn them together in the first place. They chose honesty over pretense, courage over fear, and love over judgment. Slowly but surely, they proved that relationships built on mutual respect and shared values could transcend even the widest divides. As weeks turned into months, Ethan and Victoria's bond deepened, but so did the scrutiny surrounding them. News of their relationship leaked to the media after paparazzi spotted them having coffee at a quiet cafe downtown. Headlines like "Billionaire Heiress Dates Small-Town Mechanic" splashed across tabloids, accompanied by unflattering commentary about whether Ethan was after her money or if Victoria was indulging in some fleeting rebellion against her privileged upbringing. First, Ethan tried to brush it off. "Let them talk," he told Victoria one evening as they scrolled through articles on her phone. "They don't know us." But the constant attention wore on him. Customers at his shop began treating him differently, some with newfound respect, others with thinly veiled skepticism. Friends joked about private jets and luxury vacations, while strangers questioned whether he'd abandoned his dreams now that he had access to Victoria's wealth. The weight of judgment pressed down on him, making him question if he truly deserved a place in her world. Victoria faced her own struggles. Her family, already disappointed by her decision to call off her engagement, viewed Ethan as an unsuitable match. "You can't throw away your legacy for someone who fixes planes," her mother chided during a tense phone call. "Think about what this will do to your reputation." Even Victoria's closest friends expressed concern. "Are you sure this isn't just infatuation?" one asked gently. "He's great, but your lives are so different." The doubts seeped in, planting seeds of insecurity. Was their love strong enough to withstand the pressures of two opposing worlds? Could they ever find balance between Victoria's high-profile existence and Ethan's humble roots? One rainy afternoon, Ethan arrived at Victoria's penthouse unexpectedly, his expression grim. She greeted him with a warm smile that faltered when she saw the tension in his eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked, leading him to the couch. Ethan hesitated, running a hand through his damp hair. "I've been thinking, maybe we're moving too fast. Maybe I'm not cut out for this life." Victoria's heart sank. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," he sighed, struggling to put his thoughts into words. "I'm proud of who I am, Victoria. I work hard, I take care of people, and I don't need fancy cars or private jets to feel fulfilled. But being with you, it feels like I'm losing myself. Like everyone expects me to change, to become something I'm not." Tears welled in Victoria's eyes as she reached for his hand. "Ethan, I would never ask you to change. You're incredible exactly as you are. That's why I fell for you." "But the world doesn't see it that way," Ethan countered, his voice tinged with frustration. "They think I'm using you, or worse, that I'll drag you down. And honestly, Sometimes I wonder if they're right. Victoria shook her head fiercely. No, Ethan. They're wrong. You haven't dragged me down, you've lifted me up. You've reminded me what really matters. Kindness, honesty, purpose. Without you, I'd still be trapped in that gilded cage, pretending everything was fine. Her words struck a chord, but Ethan still wrestled with doubt. Even if that's true, how do we make this work? Your life is here, in boardrooms, galas, and headlines. Mine's back at the airstrip, fixing engines and chasing dreams I'm not even sure I can reach anymore. Victoria took a deep breath, her resolve firming. Then we'll find a way to blend our worlds. I don't want to lose you, Ethan. Not because of fear or judgment. If we have to fight for this, then let's fight. Inspired by her determination, Ethan nodded slowly. Okay, but it won't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is, Victoria replied with a small smile. Over the following months, they worked tirelessly to create a life that honored both of their values. Victoria used her resources to support Ethan's dream of expanding his repair shop, helping him secure funding and equipment without overshadowing his hard-earned achievements. In return, Ethan encouraged Victoria to pursue passions she'd long neglected: painting, writing, and mentoring young entrepreneurs seeking guidance. They also made compromises. Ethan agreed to attend select events with Victoria, navigating red carpets and formal dinners with good humor and grace. Meanwhile, Victoria embraced simpler pleasures, joining Ethan for weekend hikes, home-cooked meals, and impromptu stargazing sessions on the airstrip tarmac. Their relationship became a testament to the power of mutual respect and shared goals. Critics gradually softened as they witnessed the authenticity of their connection. Even Victoria's family came around, albeit reluctantly, recognizing that Ethan brought out the best in her, a version of herself they hadn't seen in years. The turning point came when Ethan proposed during a private flight aboard the same jet where they'd first met. With the engine humming softly beneath them and the sunset painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, he knelt before her, holding out a simple yet elegant ring. "Victoria Sterling," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves coursing through him. "You taught me that love isn't about where we come from. It's about where we go together. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Victoria's face as she nodded, pulling him into a tight embrace. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Their wedding was a blend of elegance and simplicity, held outdoors under a canopy of twinkling lights. Guests ranged from corporate executives to grease-stained mechanics, each celebrating the union of two people who defied convention to follow their hearts. Years later, as they stood side by side watching their children play on the airstrip grass, Ethan wrapped an arm around Victoria's shoulders. "We did it," he murmured, gazing at the life they'd built together. "We did," Victoria agreed, leaning into him, "and we proved that love can cross any divide, as long as it's real." In the end, their story wasn't just about a mechanic and a billionaire bride. It was about courage, authenticity, and the belief that true connections transcend material differences. Together, they created a legacy rooted not in wealth or status, but in the enduring power of love.